All right. Now, given Ophelia's prominence among Shakespeare's heroines, after all, nobody names albums after Rosalind or Beatrice. Given Ophelia's prominence, it can be shocking to be reminded that she only appears in 5 scenes. Right? We only see Ophelia. Ophelia only has lines in 1.3. 2.1, 3.1, 3.2, and of course here. 4.5 is the first time we've seen her since she was in the audience next to Hamlet for the play within the play in 3.2. But of course, this is her big scene and is overwhelmingly responsible for her aforementioned prominence among Shakespearean women. This is the mad scene. Ophelia's mad scene is probably the most coveted scene for an actress to play in all of Shakespeare. Now, we do have to confront this plot device that Ophelia has lost her mind here, right? What we quickly assess is going on is that she has taken the news of her father Polonius's death so hard, and not just the news that he is dead, but the fact that the person responsible was her ex-boyfriend, Hamlet. So yes, this was obviously very upsetting news, but this idea that it caused her to go mad, after all, she is hardly the only child of a murdered parent in this play. Hamlet himself is, and in addition, we've got Fortinbras Jr., who we got a cameo from in the immediately previous scene, and of course Ophelia's brother Laertes, who also shows up in 4 or 5, having been away at college in France since Act 1, Scene 3. And they're all angry or upset, and with Hamlet we've got that eternal question about whether he is really crazy or not. But it's only Ophelia who just apparently goes uncontrollably, nonsensically mad. So there is, of course, a sexist reading of this that we heard described by the Ghost himself back in 3-4. This idea that conceit in weakest bodies, strongest works. In other words, a conceit, an idea can run away with you, can drive you insane more easily if you are the half of humanity that exists in the weakest bodies, i.e. women. So the idea that a woman's brain would be completely broken by bad news in a way that a man's brain would not was something that would have seemed logical or like common sense to a lot of people in Shakespeare's audience. But as far as what Shakespeare himself is doing here, it is not straight sexism so much as it is using the sexist prejudices of the audience in order to achieve something that I think can fairly be called proto-feminist. After all, Ophelia has been getting bossed around, told what to do, disrespected, dismissed by everyone else, all of the male characters for the entire play so far. And so this scene where she finally gets to unload, where she finally gets the release, where, as is foreshadowed in 2.2, where the lady speaks her mind freely. Remember that line from right after Rosencrantz and Guildenstern tell Hamlet that those actors he likes are on their way to the castle. Hamlet gives this little speech, apparently genuinely cheered up by the news, this little speech about all of the stock roles in the acting company. He that plays the king shall be welcome, his majesty shall have tribute of me, the lover shall not sigh gratis, the adventurous knight shall use his foil and target, the clown shall make those laugh whose lungs are tickle of this air, and the lady shall speak her mind freely, or the blank verse shall halt for it. So all these scenes later in Act 4, Scene 5, finally, the lady speaks her mind freely, and indeed, the blank verse does halt for it. Ophelia, in her mad scene, speaks exclusively in either prose or in ballad meter, and never in the more formal, the more masculine blank verse that we associate with major important speeches by the other characters. Now, a lot of stuff that she says here, condemnation of the hypocrisy, the cruelty of the male characters and of the male-dominated society that has thus crushed her, might have been received rather unsympathetically back in the 1590s, except that Shakespeare is able to use this device of madness to excuse it, right? A female character who speaks up this much about how she's being treated might have been viewed unsympathetically, but because Shakespeare uses this sexist device of, women with their weak female brains go insane so easily, he is able to turn that around, to have the lady speak her mind, to take advantage of this sexist stereotype and use it as an excuse for the lady to speak her mind in a way that would not be judged harshly, because after all, it's not her fault, she's crazy. Now, the importance, even for people who are new to the play or to the original audience, the importance of Ophelia's entrance here and of what she's about to say is set up by a few things that even before she enters, just after line 20, signal the audience to interpret this as the feminist response to, or at least female equivalent of, a lot of Hamlet's big scenes and speeches. Significantly, I think deliberately, it is the only scene in the play where one of the female characters has the opening line. Gertrude's "I will not speak with her," line 1. This is the, out of all 20 scenes in the play, it's the only scene that is begun by the speech of a woman, the highest ranking woman, the queen, just as the king has the first line of the majority of other scenes. The gentleman's analysis, in some editions, Horatio's analysis. There's some back and forth about who has this speech beginning in line 4. Her speech is nothing, yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearers to collection. They yawn at it and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts. In other words, the stuff she says, the stuff that poor crazy Ophelia says, makes no sense, or seems to make no sense at first, yet there's so much room for interpretation, right? The unshaped use of it, that you can't help but decide it means something. It doth move the hearers to collection. They yawn at it, make this face, and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts. They interpret it in a way that perhaps says more about themselves than it does about Ophelia. Now, clearly, this analysis of mad speech and how it is like poetry that one must interpret, seeming to make no sense at first, but delivering a meaning eventually, is meant to remind us of some analyses we've heard of Hamlet's own supposedly mad speech in other scenes. I said most famously, Polonius's "Though this be madness, yet there is method in it," when Hamlet is messing with him in 2.2, followed by the even more significant and longer analysis, how pregnant sometimes his replies are, a happiness which often madness hits on, that reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. Both with the use of the adjective pregnant and the verb delivered, aligning itself with that long scene with Act 2, Scene 2's a long identification or long habit of punning on the two senses of the word conceive. Conceive as in to conceive a child, to make a new person, and conceive as in to come up with an idea. Perhaps even more significantly in terms of the way that Ophelia's entrance is being set up here. Look at what we hear from the Queen briefly in line 17. She gets a 4-line aside. To my sick soul, as sin's true nature is, each toy seems prologue to some great amiss. So full of artless jealousy is guilt, it spills itself in fearing to be spilt. So a very vague but intriguing 4 lines about feeling guilty about something or other to herself real quick right before someone enters. Where did we see this before? Well, Claudius did a very, very similar speech right before Hamlet entered in Act 3, Scene 1. We heard that quick just before he scurries off to join Polonius behind the curtain or whatever they're hiding behind. The king says to himself, how smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word, O heavy burden. So he is not yet explicitly admitting having killed his brother, but he says in a scene where the last scene had ended with some doubt about his guilt, this very, ooh, did you hear that? Vague reference quickly to himself, even though there are other people around, a reference to feeling guilty about something or other. Gertrude does the same thing here in very similar language right before Ophelia enters. Now, back in 3.1, when Hamlet enters right after Claudius says that other stuff, it's to drop to be or not to be. The most famous speech in the history of everything. So the signal here, having the high-ranking female character, having the queen do something that mirrors Claudius's 4-line aside to himself in 3.1 before to be or not to be, right before Ophelia comes in, it signals us to be ready to receive whatever Ophelia is about to come in and say as the counterpoint to, as the feminist or female equivalent of or answer to Hamlet's very famous speech from 3.1. But rather than do, logical proofs in blank verse with, a thesis statement and evidence for it, it's a very orderly, very symbolically, traditionally masculine speech, to be or not to be. Ophelia comes in singing and riddling. How should I your true love know from another one? By his cockle hat and staff and his sandal shoon. He is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone, at his head a grass, green turf, at his heels a stone. Inquiring about true love and how it can be distinguished from untrue love, and also making references to death and dying and someone being gone, presumably her father Polonius. But not all of her speech is about death. A lot of it is about romance. Her song around line 48. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I made at your window to be your Valentine. Then up he rose, donned his clothes, and up the chamber door let in the maid, that out a maid never departed more. In other words, the woman was a virgin when she entered the room and not a virgin, a maid anymore when she left it. She continues, by Gis and by St. Charity, alack and fie for shame. Young men will do it if they come to it by cock they are to blame. Now, by cock was a euphemism, a way of avoiding taking God's name in vain, something you said instead of by God. But yes, in Shakespeare's day, cock also meant what it means now. Before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. So would I have done by yonder sun, and thou hadst not come to my bed. So most of, so far, what she says is not about someone being dead and gone, lady dead and gone, but references to being taken advantage of sexually, to the loss of virginity, to a promise of marriage being reneged upon. So clearly, this is making us wonder whether it is an admission or a half admission that indeed Hamlet and Ophelia had gone all the way, had slept together before the play started. That thing that her brother was creepily so concerned about back in Act 3, Scene 1. Weigh what loss your honor may sustain if with too credent ear you list his songs and your chaste treasure open to his unmastered importunity. Don't trust him and lose your virginity to him. He might not be able to marry you. So we might take this, more than might, probably should, I suppose, take this as an implication that Ophelia did, but perhaps even before, almost certainly, in fact, before the play started. Hamlet was too busy once it started, that she had slept with Hamlet and is now regretting it. Tellingly, in line 65, the thing that the guy in the song swears by is the sun. So what I had done by yonder sun, and thou hadst not come to my bed. The very same thing that Hamlet swore by in the intercepted love letter that we heard quoted by Polonius in Act 2, Scene 2. Doubt thou the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. A great question mark, a great Easter egg embedded there by Shakespeare. Hamlet is swearing that he loves Ophelia by the fact that the sun revolves around the earth, something that was believed to be true in the Middle Ages when the play is set, but known, or in the process of coming to be known, to be false in the later Renaissance when Shakespeare's writing and staging the play. So the audience kind of going, wait, so that's not true, but the characters thought it was. Does that mean he really loves her or not? Even above that, at lines 43, 42, they say the owl was a baker's daughter. Lord, we know what we are, but we know not what we may be. Reminds me of those closing lines of the Player Kings from the play within the play in 3.2. Our wills and fates do so contrary run that our devices still are overthrown. Our thoughts are ours, their ends none of our own. Ophelia's, we know what we are, but know not what we may be. You know, who we are on the inside, but what happens when we try to participate in the world and change things is totally random. I spoke in the video for 3.2 how important, how of great and of central importance I think that speech of the Player Kings is. So having Ophelia echo it in sentiment here also ramps up the equal and opposite importance of this scene for her and for the symbolically and by extension the female characters or the role of women in or of femininity in society and in the play as a whole. Now, after dropping all that, she flees the room for a second. The king and queen lament her madness. Poor Ophelia, divided from herself and her fair judgment, without the which we are pictures or mere beasts. He says in lines 83 through 85. Yet another echo of this, what makes people different from the other animals sentiment that we hear so many characters bring up in so many different ways, likening it also to the absence of judgment, the absence of reason, not just to beastliness or to but to pictures, right? The idea of a representation of a person that is not real, right? A painting of a person looks like a person, but is not a real person. This idea of people versus paintings will be brought up by Claudius again in two scenes in 4:7 when he references the painting of a sorrow, a face without a heart. Two-dimensionality and the limits of fake people, the limits of fiction, and how possible it is to transcend them and create real people the way God does is on Shakespeare's mind, I think, more so in this play than in any of his others. Claudius doesn't get to philosophize for too much longer about that because there is a noise within. And right after that, a messenger informs us that young Laertes in a riotous head o'erbears your officers. The rabble call him lord. They cry, choose we, Laertes shall be king. In other words, Laertes is back, and he's not alone. He's got a mob with him, and he's storming the castle. He's overpowered your guards. He's on his way through the door to usurp you. He's at the head of an armed mob leading a revolution against you. Laertes, after telling his mob to hang out a while, enters around line 112, demanding, "Oh, thou vile king, give me my father." So clearly we are supposed to be contrasting Laertes here with Hamlet. Laertes doing what Hamlet never quite got around to doing, actually running right up to the king armed and demanding vengeance for his father. And Laertes' father was just Polonius, who was, a schmuck, and Hamlet's dad was the greatest guy ever. But, well, Polonius or not, your dad is your dad, I guess, and Laertes is understandably upset, running all the way back to Denmark from France, I guess, as soon as he got the news. Has a sword right to Claudius's chest. It seems Gertrude is gallantly trying to hold him back, and causing the king to state in lines 122, "Let him go, Gertrude, do not fear our person. There such divinity doth hedge a king, that treason can but peep to what it would, acts little of his will." In other words, let him go. Don't worry. It's one thing to say you're going to kill a king, but when you're actually confronted with one in person, a king is so awe-inspiring that you end up not being able to do what you said you were going to do, or the divinity that doth hedge a king, something that would have been literally believed, right? The idea of the king as God's anointed, or the idea behind belief in absolute monarchy, that God would somehow guide the king's decisions. Now, this idea about it's impossible. It's one thing to say you're going to kill a king, but it's impossible to actually do it when you're face to face with one. Clearly, in context, this is more than a little ironic, since the guy who's saying it is the only person in the play thus far who has actually killed a king, his own brother. So even as he speaks it, he must know it's not true. That phrase, the divinity that doth hedge a king, sometimes gets quoted out of context by people who are trying to argue that Shakespeare actually believed that kings or royals were better than other people. In context, I say it proves he didn't think that, right? Since the guy who's saying it can't possibly mean it. We know that he doesn't believe that it's impossible to kill a king when you're face to face with one, because secretly he has done that very thing, and we, the audience, know it. Now, the other thing we would be, or we should be, I think, noticing about Laertes here, in addition to the fact that it may be an advantage that he's not quite as smart as Hamlet is, I dare damnation, he declares in line 133. To this point I stand, that both the worlds I give to negligence, let come what comes, only I'll be revenged most thoroughly for my father. This idea that both the worlds I give to negligence, i.e., I don't care about my punishment either in this world or the next. I don't care even what God or the devil or anybody has to say about it. I'm just here to get revenge without thinking about it. Now, we hear that, and we are, of course, reminded that Hamlet did a little too much thinking about it, that an inability to give either of the two worlds to negligence was Hamlet's precise problem. Most pointedly in 3.3, when he had a perfect opportunity to kill Claudius and refrained from doing so because of some quibble about how it would go for him in the next world. If you've got revenging to do, it probably helps not to be the smartest guy in the world. Laertes is not necessarily dumb, but we can safely assume he's not as smart as Hamlet. After all, nobody is. And I guess it is for this reason that his revenging, at least so far, looks like it's being done a lot more promptly and efficiently. Furthermore, he's not alone. Something else I think we're supposed to notice here. Even before he enters, the messenger lets us know that he's not by himself. He's at the head of a mob. The rabble call him Lord. So this reference to the rabble as one of the only references. And when the guys are at the door with their "No, let's come in, we will," in lines 113 and 111. It's the only time we, even if it's just for a second, actually hear and see from the common people of Denmark. They're referenced up until now, most significantly in the beginning of 4.3, when Claudius worries about how he might not be able to get away with punishing Hamlet, who's loved of the distracted multitude, right, the common people, and where to sow the offender's scourge is weighed, but never the offense. Hamlet is so popular with the people, there might be a revolution if Claudius punishes him for killing Polonius, or at least Claudius is sufficiently worried about that possibility not to do it. This, I think, forces us to ask, why didn't it ever even occur to Hamlet to get a bunch of other people in on this, right? If Hamlet is so popular with the common people, as even Claudius, his enemy, admits he is, why doesn't Hamlet go to the people and say, "Hey, I'm that Prince Hamlet Jr. guy that you all love so much. Guess what? My dad was your beloved last king. My dad was murdered. It was Claudius. Grab your torches and pitchforks and let's all go storm the castle and take care of this guy." Not only does Hamlet not do this, it never, despite the many lines worth of philosophizing about everything under the sun he does, it never even occurs to him to do this. From the second he gets handed the revenge mission in 1.5, thy commandment all alone shall live within the volume of my brain unmixed with baser matter. He just assumes a priori that the revenge mission must be carried out solo. The ghost doesn't say so. He just says, get revenge. He doesn't say you have to do it all by yourself. If the people are ready to follow Laertes, and who the heck is Laertes? They probably didn't even know who he was. If the people are ready to take up arms and storm Elsinore to overthrow Claudius just because Laertes tells them to, then Claudius must not be a very popular king. His approval rating as king must be fairly low. Um, and plus, even if it comes down to persuasive ability, clearly Hamlet is more eloquent and well spoken, presumably much more persuasive to a crowd than Laertes is. In short, if Laertes was able to do this, obviously Hamlet would have been able to do it. And it never for a second even occurs to him that doing it this way would be a possibility. Get a bunch of guys, get an armed mob, and lead a popular revolution against Claudius, rather than sneaking up on him and stabbing him all by myself. Probably something we're supposed to be thinking about. Claudius is protesting. You don't understand. It wasn't me. I am guiltless of your father's death and am most sensibly in grief for it, he says at lines 149, 150. Right after that, Ophelia, the mad Ophelia, re-enters with her, though there are not any actual stage directions or costuming directions by Shakespeare about how Ophelia is supposed to look here. By long-standing tradition, she is dressed all in flowing white, with her hair all messy and her usually red hair all messy and undone. It's nowhere in the text stated that Ophelia is a redhead, but by a long-standing theatrical tradition and in paintings and such, she usually is. Now, something that is textually specified, of course, is her famous flowers that she's handing out to everyone in the scene. Sometimes it's done with real flowers, sometimes to accentuate the madness, she's handing out imaginary flowers as though she really thinks she has some in her hands. Seeing his mad sister, Laertes kind of melts, drops the sword and is overcome with grief. Dear maid, kind sister, sweet Ophelia, he remarks, heavens, is possible a young maid's wits should be as mortal as an old man's life. In other words, is a young woman's sanity really as fragile as the life of an old man, i.e. their father, would be. He continues, nature is fine in love, and where 'tis fine it sends some precious instance of itself after the thing it loves, echoing this belief that because Ophelia is pure and good and beautiful, she is more closely aligned with capital N nature, and that it was for this reason that it was easier for her to go mad, because she was more closely in tune with some romantic with a capital R idea of capital N nature. We're 200 years before the Romantic era here, but yes, this is similar to the Romantic and the Victorian belief that consumption, for example, was a disease that afflicted sensitive people, and the Romantic legend of the death of John Keats being by consumption being evidence of his close relationship with capital N nature. We've got Laertes argues something similar about his sister here. Hadst thou thy wits and didst persuade revenge, it could not move thus, he continues at line 168, in another line that relates to the play's ongoing references to logical persuasion, right? Having a solid logical mathematical argument in favor of something versus having the fire in the belly, versus having the emotional impetus to do it. He's saying that seeing his crazy sister speaking nonsense, inspires him to get revenge more effectively than a well done thesis paper in favor of revenge would be able to argue him into doing it. Another line about the, at least in certain circumstances, superiority of emotion to reason when there's work that needs doing, revenging, for example. Ophelia then goes about to the other characters. Oh, how the wheel becomes it, she remarks at line 171, meaning both, I suppose, perhaps she is miming here the motion, pantomiming the girl at the spinning wheel, a traditional symbol of femininity, but also referencing the wheel of fortune, the proverbial wheel of fortune, which we heard spoken about literally by the first player in the speech about Priam and Pyrrhus and Hecuba and the fall of flaming Troy towards the end of 2.2, when the spokes and fellies were broken from Fortune's wheel, and the round nave was bowled down the hill of heaven. So the wheel here meaning both the wheel of fortune, referencing Ophelia's pitiable fate here, and the spinning wheel, like the flowers that she's handing out, a symbol of femininity. This nothing's more than matter, her brother says at line 173. Yet another line that means, this nonsense makes more sense than sense. There's rosemary, Ophelia opines. That's for remembrance, pray you love, remember. There's pansies, that's for thoughts, as she hands out these real or imaginary, depending on the staging, flowers. She's referencing their symbolic associations. The rosemary symbolizing memory. There's fennel for you and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. There's a daisy. I would give you some violets, but they withered all when my father died. Now, beyond the symbolic associations of the flowers, there is another increasingly popular theory here that we might pause to address. Somebody who knows a lot more about Renaissance botany than I do, or than other commentators on Shakespeare did for hundreds of years, once figured out that in Shakespeare's time and before, some of the flowers Ophelia mentions here, rue, for example, or columbines, were low-level poisons used as a folk abortifacient, something you could brew up and use to terminate a pregnancy. So this, among other things, has given rise to the increasingly popular Ophelia is pregnant theory. The idea that the sex she possibly had with Hamlet before the play started got her pregnant, and that she has secretly been with child all this time. We know from her comment that it's been twice 2 months since Hamlet Sr. died in 3.2, that she would be right about now at the point where a pregnancy, if one had indeed occurred, would be no longer physically concealable, starting to, as the saying goes, show. Another term in the theatrical sense punned on to her rather extensively in Act 3, Scene 2. Be not you ashamed to show, he'll not shame to tell you what it means. Can be taken in a very different way with this theory in mind. And if not only if we take her as pregnant, but if we take these flowers as reference to their the names of these flowers as reference to their abortifacient properties, then we even have another possible explanation for the madness here, that she tried to brew up some folk remedy, some concoction to terminate the pregnancy, but screwed up the dosage and gave herself brain damage. And that's actually the madness, that it's not that, her weak female brain went crazy from the bad news, but that it was a side effect of something she tried to cook up to terminate her pregnancy by Prince Hamlet. Now, if that is what you tried to do, it is, of course, understandable in her circumstances. She is caught, if we take it this way, in her own ethical paradox that mirrors Prince Hamlet's own ethical paradox, right? He's in a moral paradox about revenge, about violence. On the one hand, Christianity held revenge to be a bad thing, right? Jesus says, turn the other cheek. The Lord says, vengeance is mine. You don't get revenge, I do after they're dead. On the other hand, it also says, honor thy father. And it was Hamlet's father's ghost who ordered him to go get revenge. So does that mean he's supposed to do it or not? If we regard Ophelia as having been secretly pregnant by Hamlet this whole time, she would be caught in a moral paradox of her own. She has to marry the guy who got her pregnant. But at this point, the guy who got her pregnant also killed her father. And how can she possibly be expected to marry the guy who killed her father? The idea that 4.5 is the feminine or feminist response to Hamlet's end of the play. We saw how Ophelia is introduced at the beginning of this scene with language from the gentleman and then from the queen that echoes certain other important entrances of Hamlet. The possible moral paradox that she's in would be the female equivalent of Hamlet's own paradox, right? The idea that violence is to men as sex is to women has come up in the play before now. In 1.3, I think most chiefly in Ophelia's first scene, just as this is her last. That advice that Polonius gives to his son Laertes as he's leaving for college: beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. In other words, don't fight, it's wrong, but if you do fight, make sure you win, because even though fighting is wrong, your worth as a man will be evaluated by how good you are at fighting. And we have next to that the equally hypocritical, but for the other gender, advice he gives to his daughter. Don't see Hamlet anymore. Don't sleep with him. On the one hand, don't have sex. It's wrong. But at the same time, be sexually attractive. We've heard about Ophelia's good beauties being the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness, that she's admirable for her fairness, for her beauty, but she's not supposed to use it, right? Just as the male characters were taught to be good at violence, but not use it. So society, the two madnesses here, right? Society drives men crazy with hypocritical advice about violence, and drives women crazy with hypocritical advice about sex. The other side of the coin is finally visible in Act 4, Scene 5, with female madness being engendered for similar but for equal and opposite causes. Now, if we are supposed to take it this way, that Ophelia has been secretly pregnant this whole time, the question this demands of us is, did Hamlet know, or to any extent suspect? If so, if he knew, or if he even indeed suspected, it makes his treatment of her all the more unforgivable, completely indefensible. Evidence that he knew or suspected, well, we have to admit that his famous refrain to her during the rejection of Ophelia in 3-1, their first scene together, "Get thee to a nunnery." People have often commented on how, it was also slang for whorehouse in addition to meaning an actual convent. But the third meaning or third implication would be that a nunnery place a young woman could go back then to abandon an unwanted child. So we might take "get thee to a nunnery" as evidence that Hamlet is on some level aware of the pregnancy. If so, and if that's what he meant by that line, it is even for the most pro Hamlet of readers, very, very difficult, and I suppose, let's face it, impossible to defend him. But of course, we can hardly prove that that's what he meant by that line, or even that Ophelia is pregnant at all. But it is one way to take the text. I tend, I find myself more than a little persuaded that Shakespeare might have had something like this in mind, and have been hinting at it deliberately. As far as whether he intended us to think that Hamlet knew, I find an idea of Hamlet's blindness there psychologically compelling, right? That he is certainly in some pre or proto Freudian sense, the Freud 300 years early sense of Hamlet being blind to the fact that he is about to be a father because he has not finished being a son, right? Even though his father is gone, he still thinks of himself as a son to his father, and so is unable to perceive that a child of his own might be in the process of becoming visible, of going from the inside to the outside. And certainly in terms of Ophelia's, if we take the Ophelia is pregnant theory seriously, it also ratchets up Ophelia's importance as a central symbol, right? Because the play has given us a barrage of puns on the two senses of the word conceive, right? To conceive a child and to conceive of a plan or an idea. A conceit is a thought, or idée fixe, and the other, I guess, even more central theme of what's on the inside versus what's on the outside, something secret on the inside, and whether or not it is visible on the outside. This has largely operated or been made reference to regarding Claudius's guilt, right? The king's secret on the inside being extracted by the play. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king, becoming visible on the outside due to the guilty reaction on his face. But pregnancy, right, where we all come from, would be the central, in all of human existence, thing that is a secret on the inside at first, but slowly becomes visible on the outside. And the very word we use for that, when a pregnancy starts to show, is also used extensively in this play to refer to the business of theater, of putting on a show. Many times back in Act 3, Scene 2 in the play, play within a play scene, spoken, many of those lines, to Ophelia herself. So in terms of the awe-inspiring, infinite, thematic and symbolic web of this play, in which everything connects to everything else in 1,000 different ways, which we are toiling all our lives to find, to use Wordsworth's phrase. The idea of a secret Ophelia pregnancy would be symbolically compelling. Gosh, even her name. We've talked once or twice before about whether names have any significance here. Ophelia could be taken to mean, sort of love of nothing, or that she has nothing to attach her love to, right? The suffix philia, meaning love of, as in bibliophilia, love of books, right? Words ending in ophelia mean love of something. But the O could be taken as a zero, right? She has nothing to attach her love to. Or it could mean that she loves Hamlet if we take Hamlet to represent theater, the O there being the wooden O, the globe itself. But it might also be, as once again James Joyce likes to remind us, a pun on omphalos, Greek for or navel or belly button, right? The thing that the umbilical cord is attached to. Yet another possible symbol of birth, conception, pregnancy. Her final lines before she exits: he is gone, and we cast away moan, God have mercy on a soul, and of all Christian souls, pray God by you, God be with you. So Ophelia's last line, a plea that God will have mercy on the souls of the other characters in the play, almost as if in her madness she has gained a higher perspective, kind of like the one the ghost has, where she feels, if not necessarily rationally understanding, just how many sins of various kinds all the other characters are racking up, as if she can perceive, how it's all going to end, and all these other people are going to need God to have mercy on their souls. And then in the closing 15 or so lines, the king calms Laertes down and gets him on his side. Be you content to lend your patience to us, and we shall jointly labor with your soul to give it due content. And you hear me out, and I'll prove to you, in other words, that I had nothing to do with your father's death. Laertes protests that his means of death is obscure funeral. I must call it in question. He served the throne of Denmark for a long time, yet his body was unceremoniously ditched somewhere. There wasn't a big funeral parade. He didn't lie in state. He wasn't given the type of funeral that his service had earned. And the final lines, the king swearing that where the offense is, let the great axe fall. I pray you go with me. Leading him off with his arm around him, and we see, the king is now going to get Laertes on his side, take advantage of Laertes's grief for his dead father and mad sister, and own, I guess, lack of judgment. So there's a strength-weakness thing here going on. The fact that Laertes is not quite as logical as Hamlet is made him fast out of the gate when it came to revenging, but it also means he doesn't have quite the BS detector that Hamlet does. So, if you're more to the Laertes end of things, strong on passion, weak on logic, then, if you're going to get some revenge, get it right away before anybody has a chance to talk to you. Because if you might end up falling for whatever they tell you. More on that in Act 4, Scene 7. And first up, Act 4, Scene 6. Nobody's favorite scene, in the play, but there are a few things worthy of remark about it. See you in the next video for those.